Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into, well, poetry, which, let's be honest, can feel kind of intimidating, right?
It's true. Poetry can feel like this big, mysterious ocean.
Exactly. Like I'm drawn to it, but do I really get it? Not always. And you mentioned in your notes wanting to go beyond just the textbook stuff, really see how poetry connects to like your actual life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're using some excerpts from the Wikipedia article on poetry as a starting point,
Okay.
but who knows where we'll end up. That's the fun of a deep dive.
Right.
Yeah.
And Wikipedia says it right away. It's hard to define poetry.
Yeah, no kidding. But maybe instead of getting stuck on what it is or isn't, we can look for the common threads. They mention language, rhythm, emotion a lot. Those feel like the biggies, would you say?
Definitely. And that's where the artistry comes in, right? Those things are there for a reason. The poet's making choices about how to use them.
So it's more than just like fancy talking, which I've totally been guilty of thinking sometimes.
For sure. There's a real intention there.
And you said in your notes you wanted to better appreciate that, to see the craft. Which brings us to rhythm.
Yeah, rhythm. Now, when you hear that word, you might think of like a very specific kind of poem, something with a really obvious beat, daddy you, like Shakespeare.
Oh, yeah, that'll get stuck in your head.
That's meter.
Yeah.
But rhythm in poetry is way more than that. Think of it like the pacing, the pauses, how the lines flow together. Or don't. All that affects how it feels when you read it aloud.
You know, that makes me think of music, which I love. You can feel the rhythm even without any words. It's like the poem has its own heartbeat.
Exactly. And that heartbeat is totally tied into how the poem makes you feel. Think about a fast-paced poem compared to a slow one. Different moods, even with similar words.
Speaking of different, Wikipedia's got a whole laundry list of poetry forms. Sonnets, haikus, free verse. How's anyone supposed to keep it all straight?
It's a lot. Don't get too hung up on the labels themselves. Think of them like tools in the poet's toolbox. Each form has its own strengths, limitations, its own way of shaping the words. Like a sonnet, that strict 14-line structure rhyme scheme. It's almost like a puzzle the poet's solving with words.
So they're intentionally giving themselves constraints. That's kind of cool.
Right. It forces the creativity in a new direction. Often those constraints lead to these surprising connections between ideas.
So the form itself becomes part of the meaning. Okay, I like that. So if a sonnet's a puzzle, what's a haiku?
A haiku's like a photograph, I think. Capturing one moment, a feeling, an image, as simply as possible.
Like a tiny little world contained in just a few words.
Exactly. And then you've got the total opposite, free verse. No strict rules, it's all about fluidity. If a sonnet's a puzzle and a haiku's a photo, free verse is like jazz. Improvisation, playing with the sound.
Ooh, I like that. So you've got structure, you've got snapshots, you've got improvisation. It's like different ways of sculpting with language, basically. What about all those techniques they talk about, though? Imagery, metaphor, symbolism. That stuff always felt a bit intimidating to me, like for English professors to analyze, not for me just enjoying a poem.
Those terms sound intimidating, but they're just how the poet makes you feel something. Imagery, for example, is all about painting a picture in your head.
Okay, yeah.
Vivid descriptions that use your senses. It's not telling you about a sunset. It's making you see it, feel the warmth, maybe smell the salty air.
Okay, yeah. That's way more powerful than just saying, like, there was a sunset.
Right. You're experiencing it.
So if imagery is like painting a picture with words, what are metaphor and symbolism? They both seem to be about saying one thing but meaning something else, like a secret code.
You're getting warmer. A metaphor is a direct comparison, linking two things that seem totally unrelated to make you see them differently.
Yeah.
Symbolism's a bit more subtle. It's using a thing or an image to represent something bigger, like an abstract idea or an emotion.
Okay, I need an example. Got a good one I might actually know.
What about those two roads diverging in Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken?
Oh yeah, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. I know that one.
Exactly. Now, those two roads are literally just paths in the woods. But Frost is using them as a metaphor.
Right.
For what?
Life choices. And that road less traveled becomes about like choosing a less conventional life, maybe.
You got it. And that road becomes a symbol for all the uncertainty, the possibilities of the future.
Okay, I see how that works now. Poets are clearly really good with words, but so what? Is this all just a game? Or does poetry actually do anything for us out here in the real world? Like, why should our listener care?
That is the million-dollar question. And that's where we go beyond just analyzing the techniques and tap into the true power of poetry. Because it's not just a game, it's a way of seeing the world more deeply, connecting with our own emotions, with the experiences of others.
So it's like it gives us a new lens to view things through ourselves, the world, each other. And it can help us understand those emotions better too. Have you ever read a poem that just got a feeling you were having but couldn't quite articulate?
All the time. Someone else gets it, you're not alone in feeling that way. It's powerful.
It really is. And speaking of connections, we were talking about rhythm earlier, and it made me think of something else from Wikipedia. It mentions this really strong connection between poetry and music, not just in the free verse, jazz way. Oh, yeah, it does say that. Something about poems being performed, often with instruments originally. I get that poems have rhythm, use sounds in a similar way to music.
Yeah.
But is the connection deeper than that, do you think?
Way deeper. Think about it. Both poetry and music are working with sound and time to create a feeling in the listener. A poem's meter, how those stressed and unstressed syllables make a pattern. It can be like a heartbeat, a galloping horse, a lullaby.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it like that. But it's so true. When you read a poem aloud, you kind of are creating a melody with your voice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just like a composer might use a crescendo to build tension, a poet can use alliteration, repeating those consonant sounds, to create a feeling of, urgency or excitement.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's like all of these poems I've read just came alive with a whole other layer.
That's the cool thing about it. And for most of history, that connection between poetry and music wasn't just, metaphorical, it was literal. Epic poems, think Homer's The Odyssey, they were chanted, sung, not just read on a page. Imagine how much more powerful that would be.
So poetry is baked into our DNA, this primal way of communicating before writing even existed.
Kind of. Think about lullabies, kids' rhymes.
Yeah.
That's how we first learn language, feeling, even history through sound. Poetry taps into that shared human experience.
Okay, that gives me chills. Those boring poetry books in the library are suddenly way more interesting. But Wikipedia also mentions that poetry wasn't always about feelings and beautiful language. It talks about how poetry's been used for things like moral instruction, political commentary, even religious rituals. That feels like a different beast altogether.
It is a different beast. Poetry can be and has been a powerful tool for way more than just personal expression. Throughout history, poets have used their craft to challenge power structures, inspire change, explore really big, difficult ideas, think protest songs, or the power of MLK's speeches. They're full of poetic devices like repetition, metaphor, powerful imagery.
So those same techniques, imagery, metaphor, like we talked about, they can be used to make you feel the beauty of a sunset, but also to expose injustice or inspire action.
Exactly. That's what's so fascinating about poetry. It can be super personal and universal at the same time. It can be about the quietest whispers of your soul or the loudest calls for justice.
Seeing poetry in a whole new light now. This deep dive is living up to its name. It's interesting, Wikipedia also mentions that poetry can actually change over time, reflecting the culture and values of different eras. It's a living record of human experience.
Absolutely. It's not just words on a page. It's a reflection of the human spirit,
Yeah.
the hopes, fears, dreams, struggles of that time and place when it was written. Think about the Romantic poets, all about nature and emotion and how different their poems sound from, the modernists, writing after wars, industrialization.
Totally different realities they were dealing with, so of course their poems sound different.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to approach poetry with a sense of curiosity and context.
Okay, so to really get a poem, I should maybe try to step back in time a bit, understand the context it was written in.
Exactly. Asking yourself, what was going on in the world when this was written? What was the poet responding to? What cultural stuff was shaping their words? It can unlock so much.
Now that's what I call a deep dive. But before we wrap up, there's one more thing I want to get your take on.
Let's hear it.
Wikipedia mentions this idea of heightened language in poetry, and I gotta say, that phrase always makes me kind of cringe. Does it just mean using the biggest, fanciest words possible?
That's where those textbook definitions can really trip us up. Heightened language isn't about showing off your vocabulary. It's about choosing each word carefully, intentionally, to have the most impact. Every word, every comma, every line break is doing a job.
So it's not about using more words, it's about making each word work harder.
Exactly. Poetry is all about concision, about boiling down an experience, an emotion, an idea to its most essential form. Think about how much a tiny haiku can say.
Okay, so instead of being scared of this heightened language, I should be looking for how the poet is using it to, like, supercharge the meaning.
Yes, don't be afraid to really slow down when you're reading. Savor the words, especially the ones that jump out at you. Why did the poet choose that word and not a different one? What effect does it create?
That's such great advice. Like, suddenly I have permission to geek out on the words themselves, not just the overall meaning. This has been a wild, deep dive today. We started with Wikipedia, but we've gone everywhere, from the nuts and bolts of poetry to why it even matters in the first place. What do you hope our listener takes away from all this?
More than anything, I hope they come away with a sense of wonder, of possibility. Poetry is not just about rhymes on a page. It can connect us to ourselves, to each other, to the world around us in these really powerful ways. It can be playful or serious, deeply personal or a call to action. But at its heart, it's about language used in this really intentional, artful, meaningful way.
Beautifully said. Which goes back to that question I asked earlier. Can you find poetry in your own life, even if you're not trying to be a poet? I'm thinking the answer's got to be yes.
Absolutely. Once you start paying attention, it's amazing how much poetry is hidden in plain sight. In a conversation, the way the light hits the leaves on a tree, even the rhythm of your own heartbeat.
I think our listeners are going to start seeing haiku moments everywhere now. This has been such a thought-provoking chat. Thank you for diving deep with me.
My pleasure.
And to you, the listener, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deeper into the world around you.